Well, good morning everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Sandy Bottom Homestead. I hope you're having a pretty decent day. It's a good day to be alive, I would have to say. So I did a video a while back, and embedded in that video was my formula that I had come up with in order to tell me how much I needed to grow for my family to meet our consumption needs. And as we tested it over the winter, I can say it was a success. So we're gonna go over that. I wanna make a dedicated video to this formula in hopes that you can use it in your garden. Before we get into this formula, I need to kind of explain to you what it can be used on and what it can't be used on, all right? So first of all, we're just gonna walk around real quick. We've got onions. No need for it. One onion plant produces one onion. You know what you're gonna get, good deal. How many onions do you eat? Whatever. Cabbages, same idea. Lettuce, same idea. Rutabagas, same idea. Taters, uh-oh. How many taters does each plant produce? Same with the tomatoes. You know, how many tomatoes are we gonna get? Hell, I don't know, but we're gonna figure it out. I'm not gonna tell you in this video how many tomatoes you're gonna get, so if that's what you're here for, see ya. But you might wanna hang on because I'm gonna tell you how to figure it out. Squash, same thing. Peppers. I had somebody come over the other day, buy peppers from me. They said, how many peppers am I gonna get off this plant? How many do I need to grow? I can't tell you how many you need to grow because it's a personal choice and it's up to you to decide what you're gonna use it for. Clearly, we've got a couple crops here that we could apply this to. We've got peas we can apply it to, and mostly right now, tomatoes and peppers and potatoes and squash. Other than that, for right now in my garden, I cannot apply this formula to anything else. I wanna stress that because I don't want you coming back and saying, I tried it and I didn't get enough cabbages, or you know, I didn't get enough whatever. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. And if you're gonna make a nasty comment, wait until the end of the video and then you're welcome to do so. But let's get into this formula. I did come up with it last year and it applied to my Brussels sprouts. So I'm gonna go over that in particular. I have not used it for anything else as of yet, but we will be using it again. And I'm probably actually thinking about living by this formula as far as my plan for my garden. So to apply this to yourself, you need to think, how much of X do I eat? Okay, we're not gonna get into calculus or anything, don't freak out. So, you know, how many Brussels sprouts do I eat? Now, I will say this, and I do need, and this is important for you to know about me, my garden, my goals, and then moving forward, and I'll tell you why it's important. Between these 7 beds, a greenhouse here, and then 4 beds over here, which makes, that's right, 11 beds. We grow and eat 70% of our vegetables from this garden. 70%, okay? Now, here comes the question. Well, what's so important? Why does that matter? Well, it matters a great deal because we still do have to go to the grocery store from time to time, and we have to buy our produce, some of it. And when we do that, for the Brussels sprouts in particular, we buy them, they sell them in the bags, and you get a ½ pound each time. So we would eat about a ½ pound per meal, roughly. So knowing that, we know how many, and then we take how many times a week do we eat Brussels sprouts. So we eat Brussels sprouts in the winter, not in the summer, in the winter, between 2 and 3 times a week. So we know that, and then if we say, okay, 3 times a week, we need 1.5 pounds of Brussels sprouts per week. And we knew that we were gonna eat them between, you know, the time frame that we usually eat them. That's not important. And so we looked at it, and I went into the Googling machine and I asked the simple question: how many Brussels sprouts grow per plant? Or what is the expected harvest per plant? Now, I know there's some people here that are watching this and they're like, well, just tell us what it is for tomatoes. I don't want to do that. My goal here is to help you learn how to figure this stuff out yourself. I don't want to do that for you because I don't want to be your crutch in your garden. The idea behind the garden is to be self-sufficient as much as possible. Even if you have one garden bed and you want to make salsa and that's it, you're self-sufficient in your salsa habit. There ain't no need to go on the street corner and try and hustle to get some salsa. You're going to get it and you're going to grow it and you're going to figure it out. And that's what I want to do for you. So I Googled this simple question. The answer I got back was, excuse me, about a half a pound to, and this is a wide range, about 1.5 pounds, but roughly a half a pound to a pound. So then I looked at it and I said, okay, let me get realistic about my skills as a gardener. And I think we need to all listen to that inner voice right there. How good am I at growing Brussels sprouts? Well, I tried for 5 years and until this year never got a harvest. So there's that. So I said, okay, I'm not very good at growing Brussels sprouts. Now, let me take this range that I got and let me apply it to my skill level. And I said, I'm gonna go ahead and expect to get on the lower end. Here's important. Remember, we said a half a pound, let's just call it a pound, 1/4 pound to a half pound of Brussels sprouts per plant. If I get more, I'm pleasantly surprised, fine. And then we looked at it and we said, and now, how many Brussels sprouts are we gonna eat a week? How many meals? If we know we eat a half a pound per week, per meal, how many meals per week? We usually do 2 to 3. I said, you know what? I want to eat my own Brussels sprouts. I'm willing to drop down to 2 meals of Brussels sprouts a week. Just 2. So that means that we need to get 1 pound of Brussels sprouts per week. And if we do 1/4 pound to a half pound, that's about 2 to 3 plants per week for that. Bring you over here to my glorious mess of a garden. Haven't had time to clean it up. We're gonna look at these tomatoes real quick before we carry on. I'm pretty good at growing tomatoes. So if I got a range at that, I would go up in the expected amount that I would harvest off of this. And you may be asking yourself, like if you look in this bed right here, there's 6 tomato plants here, there's 3 over there, and there's 6 over there. You know, why are you growing so many tomatoes? Especially after I spilled my guts to you the other day and told you I don't even like raw tomatoes. And that's simply because we can them. We like to can them. So this changes, and I'm gonna get into that after the Brussels sprout thing. This will change your equation a fair amount. But back to the Brussels sprouts. So if you go back to the beginning, when we're talking about how much you're gonna get, and you get this number from a pound, a half a pound to a pound, and which really some of the places said 1.5 pounds, let's talk about that number. That is an absolutely perfect scenario number. That means you had very minimal pest pressure, you had great fertilizing techniques, you had your spacing down right, you had plenty of sun, the weather was really good, and in what world do you live in where that happens? Exactly. You don't even have to answer, I know. It doesn't happen, right? I mean, heck, it's, I'm in coastal North Carolina, it's middle April, and it's 87 degrees today. That's not perfect weather, right? Exactly. So we know that no matter what, when you look at these numbers and you get that high side, you better not count for it. You better not count on it because you are not gonna get that high number. It is highly unlikely that you're gonna get this perfect scenario unfold. So we came up, and this is, now I was limited on space too, we planted 24 Brussels sprout plants. And they were a little tightly packed, I will admit, but we took that into account, we planted them, and then we got 15 plants harvested of varying sizes. Never actually weighed them, I just went off of like, hey, was this enough on our plates? Some of the plants were perfect, and the plants that were perfect were later in the season, meaning almost in spring. And then the ones that weren't perfect were later or earlier in the season. Now, we also planted, and here's another one, hybrids and heirlooms. And so you have variety to take into account. If you're growing an heirloom, typically speaking, you're going to get less of a harvest. Smaller maybe, less of a harvest, something like that. If you grow a hybrid, they're generally bred to have maximized harvests. And so for our Brussels sprouts, we don't care about saving the seeds. Hybrids are not genetically modified organisms. They are not GMO. You don't need to worry about that. We can debate that later. We don't have to do it right now, trust me. But you can get those and you can grow them and you can expect to get a larger harvest. And that's exactly what we saw. As a matter of fact, off of our heirlooms, we got none. So, that being said, you have to take variety into account. Now, I didn't look up for variety. This was on knowledge that I knew. Hybrids would produce more than heirlooms. So we knew that. And that's why I was willing to say, hey, you know what? I think it's possible I'm gonna get a half a pound per plant. And that's what ended up happening. It was just for the consumption of my family, and it was only for consumption, and that came out of this bed, which is now squash. And if you were the last video and I said, look, they're all yellow because we didn't fertilize them. Well, we fertilized them and now they're starting to turn green. So just a little update there. Now we come over to our tomatoes and let's talk about preserving, eating fresh and all that stuff. So we definitely plan to preserve tomatoes this year. That will happen. Probably 70%, I like the 70% number. Maybe I'll just stick with that from now on. 70% of our tomatoes will be canned. We have to take into account, and this is where experience will start to come in, is how many tomatoes go into a can, what are you gonna do with them, gather your recipes, look and see if you're making tomato sauce, then you know that you're gonna need to cook it down and you're gonna need a fair amount. I'll give you a little tip. I personally just can the whole tomato and then I make my sauce later. So there is that. So I know, like for instance, my aromas is usually what I can. When I can aromas, I put between 8 and 10 tomatoes in a can. So I can kind of figure out roughly, if I looked it up, and I haven't even done it yet, I didn't even do it for this season because I kind of, most things I knew what I was gonna do. But I could say, how many pounds of Roma tomato, how many tomatoes are in a pound of Roma tomatoes? And then you get a number and say how many pounds or how many tomatoes will a tomato plant produce, and then you can kind of go from there. Now you have to take into account determinant versus indeterminate. You know, same with peppers. If you're doing peppers, you need to take into account size of peppers, sweet peppers or hot peppers, two totally different things, and they produce on totally different levels. And that's something that you should really, really remember, is they come in totally different levels. That being said, the other thing that I've noticed in my garden and I've seen around is if you are growing something that produces a smaller, I call them fruits, even though they're not all fruits, but a smaller fruit. Well, actually a fruit is something with a seed in it, and most of them are fruit. So yeah, okay. So the fruits are smaller, you generally get more quantity. So you get more individual, let's just stick with tomatoes. You'll get 50 tomatoes instead of 25 tomatoes, but you'll get 5 pounds instead of 25 pounds. So just keep that in mind. Just depends. Is it worth it to do all of this work and research to figure out how much a plant produces, how much it is, and really look at what you consume and figure out how much you need in order to meet the needs of you and your family or your other loved ones or whoever you want to share with? I'm gonna say yes, it is. You know, it's about being in touch with your garden, your diet, what you consume, and what you need. And if you are on this path for a self-sustainable, you know, path, and like I said, even if you only make salsa, in my opinion, you're trying to be self-sustainable for your own salsa habit. So, you know, just think about that. And I think it is worth it. I definitely will be using this formula more in the future. For right now, what I'm doing is I'm focusing on fall crops, because the summer crops kind of, you know, actually, I may apply it to my watermelons this year. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna apply it to my watermelons and see what happens. I'm just curious of how many plants I'll need. And I mean, it takes into account space, because once you eliminate stuff, it gets easier and easier, and you're not wasting your time either feeding, taking care of, weeding, or managing plants that you may not even need to manage.